Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It is Friday, June 13th. So glad you could join me. Let's see who we've got on hand already. Dr. Q's here, MWFA 52. Michelle Alderman. Good to see you, Michelle. Jamie Thomas is here. Nancy Tinnell. Let's see. Mark Grinier is here. Lots of early banter from this. Okay, Brian O'Sullivan is here. D. Coleman, Dr. Q, Patty Arbor, Linda Megg, Rachel Grieve, Dick Westheimer, Rose Lennard, Jamal Uden's here, Paul Buckner, David S., Michael Ketchum, Chelsea McClellan is here, Danette Bermia, Maria L. Berg, Ryan McCarty's here, Melody Bonilla, we got Nancy Sabanik, Rick Pongratz is here, Maney, Ali Rowland, Christina Newven. Great to see you all. Amy Dower Solorzano is here, Desi Cochrane, Morgan Feny. I saw Morgan Feeney's name, I believe, in the, let's see, maybe we'll do Morgan Feeney's poems, right? Hang on one second. Maybe I'll put those up first. As always, the point of the Critique of the Week is to give that wonderful workshop experience that's so hard to get elsewhere. All you have to do is join, participate, submit your poems. Go to rattle.com/page/critique. You can find the submission portal there, and then submit up to 2 poems. Any questions you want, general advice, things you want me to talk about, and we will talk about them in your poems. This is a sort of a free MFA for anybody who wants to participate. If you hear any thunder in the background, it's raining out there, getting a little thunder. But it is good to see you all. Leave as many comments as you would in the chat windows, either on Facebook or YouTube. More YouTube than not these days. And I'll pass along as many comments as I can as we go through these poems. But yeah, let's start with Morgan Feny, who is here today and had a submission up from... so Morgan is from the UK. She's got a submission up for May 31st. We'll start with that, then we'll go to the oldest poems in the queue. Lots of questions from Morgan here, so let's take a look at these. She says, apologies in advance if these are too many questions. Please feel free to consider just one as most apt for the Critique of the Week discussion. But ignore all and proceed as usual if you like. Here are the questions. How and where to trust the reader to get your references? I wrote this poem in Glasgow. This is the first poem, I guess, and tried to make this clear by talking about the subway, but then I started worrying that this reference was too niche and obscure for people not familiar with the city. So then I started adding in additional references, allusions to the patron saint, Saint Mungo, but then those are probably even more obscure. So how do I identify what works and what is too niche and what doesn't work? Okay, that's a good question. So in general, I would just say, that's a line you have to walk. You have to sort of think about who your audience is going to be for this poem and what they might know. If you're going to be publishing, for example, this poem in the UK, I think Glasgow references would probably work pretty much universally. If you're going to shoot it over to the United States for publication, you might want to add like a little epigraph that just says Glasgow, and then we'd know where you are. In that case, if it's important to the poem. Might not be important to the poem. So it's one of those things where on a case-by-case basis, you just have to decide what matters and what doesn't. So there's that. Let's see. And then the second question, could we talk about stanza breaks, please? That's a good thing. We haven't really talked that much about them. And how to use these most effectively. How can we best make our stanza breaks in a poem meaningful in service of the poem and not just idiosyncratic or distracting? I originally wrote this in triplets, but then changed my mind. I'll paste the poem out below, so different versions of that poem. Then lastly, perhaps most importantly, what to cut. I'm pretty sure this poem is just too long, but I'm not sure what works, what doesn't, and how to cut the most effective way. How can we achieve the emotional distance to kill our darlings? And more specifically, what needs to be killed in this poem? So those are 3 things we should think about as we look at Morgan's poems. We flip over to the YouTube. Yeah. Oh, everybody's asking about the AMA over, and I should have mentioned that. Yeah, we did an AMA over on Reddit. There's a great poetry community over there on Reddit, which I wasn't really aware of. It's just the R poetry community. And let me and I'll put. See, if you just go to R poetry, and it's like anything else. So you sign up for You sign up for an account and then you discuss. It's a message board, really. But it's actually really active. There's 2 million members in this community. I mean, 34 online right now. But it's a lot of people. And it's maybe a good place to discuss and share poems that I wasn't really familiar with. Being a place, I mean, obviously I knew what Reddit was, but being a place with a lot of poetry is something I did not know. And so check that out. But then we did the Ask Me Anything thing. You can't add new questions because we wrapped it up. We sat here for like an hour and a half or 2, well, I guess 2 hours, answering questions that people had as best we could. And so you can just read all the answers and questions there. I think if you can add more, I mean, I don't know, maybe we'll look back later. I don't know. But that is the AMA. So check that out if you'd like. Dick asked a question. I saw that, the old RL Westy. Anyway, let's move on to the poems for today and Morgan Feny. We're going to talk about, in particular, references, stanza breaks, and what to cut. Those are the 3 things she asked for, so we'll check those out in particular. And here's poem number 1, Symbiosis. Here you go. Symbiosis. I think I got to shrink it a little bit to fit. There we go. Okay. Symbiosis. The art of living together. Circles of gum pressed flat on wet pavement look like the splotches of lichen that grow on dark stone. And while cold rain falls on my face and in my eyes, I think of how lymph nodes grow hot and swell, and all the sequelae of mumps and measles, sometimes sterility, sometimes death. Tonight I ride the subway clockwise, going through the city the way a knife cuts through the dimpled rind of the white pith, and then, the flesh of an orange emerging above ground, I rise a purple polka-dotted umbrella against the wind. It is frilled like a fungus sprouting. In the first free space it finds, tall as the tree that never grew, foxes live in the city, and I saw one once, stiff, legs locked, sprawled on concrete, stuck halfway up the hill. I saw a shy hedgehog in a garden, late in the drunken night. I've seen the bees dwindling, the last bats, the seagulls squabbling in George Square over the fat, hot chips they stole. I've seen pigeons that hopped half lame, feet twisted by strands of discarded human hair till their toes are mangled and sometimes gone. Sometimes they cannot fly, but puff their feathers and bully smaller birds and try to claim an abandoned crust. I walk and think of all the years when this city bore the gnashing holes of plague pits, the scars of smallpox. Today my lips are stained with juice from blackberries brought post-haste from Peru, eaten from a plastic punnet. Fruit fresh and full of pesticides, flopping limp as fish. Berries can be full of bones, fine enough to choke on. I have seen the necropolis in Paris. I've chased echoes in the caverns, seen the femurs and finger bones, skulls piled in pyramids like a green grocer's offerings, oranges and lemons gleaming freshly waxed, silent as the bells that never rang. Gold teeth still shine in old mouths and keep secrets that real bone and tooth will yield to a modern method. Plague mouth, paternity, genomes, all questions yield strings of DNA, letters assembled in mostly certain lines. Large moose skeletons rise from peat bogs, mammoths emerge from the melting ice, and autumn odors rise, old must from the dust of crushed and sodden oak leaves. We may never find the ancestor of old Sycomoresis ibaeensis, or trace the Ice Age whispers of the yeast that now bring our beer. Its descendants growing in great steel vats, cells fat with sugars, cold with a rolling fizz of fermentation, discarded down the drain when the landlord pours a pint of tenants and a pint of Stamber ale. And so she has the second version. I guess she only sent, it's only one poem. Yeah, so it's only one poem. Lisa Sloan says the detail is so good. No reference is needed for this kind of description of place. Fantastic. Yeah, I thought the details are great. And I would say as far as the first question, which is what you need to identify it as Glasgow is what it is. I would say I don't think that it's necessary unless there's a reason I don't understand why it's necessary. I don't know if we need to know it's that place. The place is evoked vividly. We know some details. We can understand it's a European city, probably in England from the details. And I think that works pretty well. And so I don't know if it's necessary, but maybe it is. And maybe you want us to know that, in which case I'd say just call it symbiosis. Glasgow 2025 or wherever you want to place it. Something like that, and then we know where we are. But I don't know if it's necessary. Yeah, Brian Sullivan says, I wouldn't have known what city, but Googling George Square would have told me right away. Yeah, it's one thing is if we wonder, we can find it, but I don't know why it matters which city it is. So I think I would say it really doesn't matter to label it Glasgow, but unless, like I said, I'm missing something. As far as maybe when we read the poem again, so it's we're going to read through more slowly. Let's take a look at what it's like with these 3-line stanzas. And I'll say, when I write poems myself, I always do the line breaks and the stanza breaks last. It's just kind of a feel for it for me, for free verse poems anyway. So how I tend to write is I like to just write in a block because I'm picking up the flow of the language, and that's what I'm really focusing on at first. And then it's seeing what structure that language sort of wants to have, how it's easiest to read. And, the more white space and the more breaks, so the shorter the lines, the slower we tend to read, the more we become a little bit more contemplative and reflective. Other poems, you want a sort of to be overcome with images piling on top of each other, so you almost can't keep up. And that's like part of the energy of the poem. And that's the kind of poem that you want to have longer lines and fewer stanza breaks. And I think in general, that's a way to guide it. But really, it's one of those things you kind of go by feel. And so what I would do is I would have a big chunk of text as I'm writing. And when I get to the end, I know where it is. Then I start to think of how the poem wants to be shaped. And I'll look and say, where's the first line break naturally feel like it should be? And then I play with having lines around that length and seeing if that works. Just worrying about line breaks and not stanza breaks yet. And then after that, you can... once you find it, sometimes you find that you want to have lines that are varying. Sometimes it fits to have a certain length, like that's just the pacing that it came out in. Sometimes, so it just depends how it feels, and you kind of play with it. And I think it's really fun just to play with a poem. It's like you're already feeling good because you finished the poem, as far as I'm concerned, when I write, and then it's just fun to play with the breaks at the end. So then you do that, and then once you get sort of the line length, then it's playing with the breaks, like seeing how many lines there ended up being. What is that divisible by? We can use some math, even though we're poets, and say, oh, it's 28 lines. We can have 7 fours, or we can have couplets, or with 30, there's more options, things like that. And so you can sort of play with having a regular breaking stanzas, and that does the same kind of thing as having regular line breaks like you'd have in the second version of the poem here. That does a similar thing as enjambment does, where it creates a tension where there's a little bit of push against the diction for moving through the poem. So it sort of highlights things and makes you skip a beat, feeling a little bit off, even though the poem looks clean on the page. And that's the nice thing you have about having regular stanzas that are the same lengths, and that maybe works. But then the other thing you can think of for stanzas is a lot of people write sort of in different movement chunks, and you can think of stanzas as similar to paragraphs, where you would have it being a way to organize your ideas. And so you say, oh, this is the chunk we're talking about this. This is the chunk we're talking about this. If you look at a poet like Billy Collins, most often has stanzas that are divided by in the same way paragraphs would be. So the stanza sizes would vary too. So there's just so many options for what to do if you're writing in free verse and you're just letting the flow of natural speech determine the lines. My first hunch is somebody just said, I lost it. Yeah, I agree about wanting. Yeah, so Jesse A says, I agree about wanting stanza breaks to at least slow down and so that I won't get lost in the block of text. Yeah, you do get kind of lost too. And so I think the impulse to do stanza breaks of some kind is nice. Let's take a look at the original version with stanza breaks. We'll go through more. As Holly York says, we haven't really talked about the poem in general. We've just talked about those line breaks. But as Holly says, the scene is set beautifully as if ready for something. And Melody Bonilla says it's missing something. And there was a sense, too. It was one of those poems where it's very vividly... the movement is very vivid. I mean, taken to a place, I'm paying attention, the stage is set, and I'm sort of waiting for what to happen and how it all ties together and the why of the poem. Why did the poem need to be written? And the poem was called Symbiosis, if you remember, the art of living together. I would cut the art of living together and just call it symbiosis. And so it's a riff on, being all together in this densely populated city, which makes sense. But we want to. There's a reason. There's something that you're wondering about that made you want to explore this topic, and that coming out in the end is really what we should be searching after. And I think that's what some people are mentioning, having it missing some component. I feel like that's what it is. But let's take a look more slowly through the poem in this Tercet's version, okay? So again, this is, I would just call it Symbiosis, maybe Glasgow. Is it Glasgow or Glasgow? I think I've said them interchangeably. But anyway. Circles of gum pressed flat on wet pavement look like the splotches of lichen that grow from stone. And while cold rain falls on my face and in my eyes, I think of how lymph nodes grow hot and swell, and all these sequelae of mumps and measles, sometimes sterility, sometimes death. Tonight I ride the subway clockwise, going through the city the way a knife cuts through the dimpled rind of the white pith and then the flesh of an orange. I think it's really great descriptions. The stage is set. We're really inside the poem, and I enjoyed that aspect of this. But again, as Winston Munt says, I was waiting for something to happen that never did happen. So let's see what happens. And there is this move toward the fungus and stuff that touches back on the beginning that has a kind of arc to it. But maybe let's read more. Emerging above ground, I rise, a purple polka-dotted umbrella against the wind. It is frilled like a fungus sprouting at the first free space it finds, as tall as the tree that never grew. So very nice. Foxes live in the city, and I saw one once, stiff, legs locked, sprawled on concrete, stuck halfway up the hill. I saw a shy hedgehog in a garden late in the drunken night. I've seen bees dwindling, and the last bats, the seagulls squabbling in George Square over the fat, hot chips they stole. I've seen pigeons too. So I want to take one pause. I saw a shy hedgehog in the garden late on the drunken night. That's one of those ones where I felt, that's a good window or a door into a story that maybe we skipped over. It ends up becoming a list of things I've seen. But I wonder if there's something that happened that drunken night that we could pull this out and make it a scene. And what else happened? Oops, I mean this one. What else happened that night? It kind of feels, I saw a shy hedgehog in a garden late in the drunken night. The hedgehog did this, and I did this, and I went back to this. It seems like there's maybe some story there that we could get an aside in, and that makes the poem feel a lot more textured too, and we get to know the speaker a lot through that kind of like a flashback almost within the poem. I think it's an opportunity to do that. We might want to consider, adding to that. But anyway, instead we get this list of things that I've seen. I've seen the bees dwindling, the last bats, the seagulls squabbling in George Square over the fat, hot chips they stole. I like that image. I've seen pigeons that hop half lame, feet twisted by strands of discarded human hair till their toes mangled and sometimes gone. Sometimes they cannot fly, but puff their feathers and bully smaller birds and try to claim an abandoned crust. I walk and think of all the years when this city bore the gashing holes of plague pits and the scars of smallpox. I do think, given all the details, it's a really rich, lush poem. I agree with the impulse and what some people have said, as Lynn Schilling just said. I like the tercets better too. Having that white space around, it reminds me, it's very similar in structure to Patricia Smith's Rattle Poetry Prize winning poem, Tavern, Church Shuttered Tavern. And notice, we'll just pop this on really quick. But notice how these, say Goldblatt's with its finger-smeared display, windows full of stifled plaid pinafore and hard-tailored serge, each unattainable thread cooing, and, just goes on and on with all these details about Chicago in that era. And just it comes to life with that. And I think she probably put it in well, I don't know. It ends with a two-line sentence. So very simple, very similar impulse behind the spacing of that poem too. But it's all the detail in this, all the richness. Having that little bit of extra space with the long lines makes the poem feel just gives you time to sort of breathe and contemplate each image a little bit more, even though technically you don't really slow down, but there's some kind of mental way that having that space gives you a little bit of breathing room. So I think that's a good impulse for this poem, and for similar reasons. Anyway, let's continue until the end. Today my lips are stained with juice from blackberries, bought post-haste from Peru, eaten from a plastic punnet, fruit fresh and full of pesticides, flopping limp as fish. So we get this turn to, today my lips are stained. It's a self-reflection of the speaker, but we haven't really gotten to know the speaker, which is why, my impulse up here was to add some kind of aside flashback. And then we could get to know the person, and maybe that meaning that people are finding missing will come out of knowing the speaker a little bit better. In that Patricia Smith poem, if we're going to use that as an example, there's a way that it's not, there's no I. The whole town becomes the sort of speaker, and the town becomes this embodied personality. And I think, that's a way to go. It becomes this collage of all the things that happen in the town. And there's a sense of movement because of where we end up. So there's sort of different directions you can go. But if you do go to a speaker, I think it'd be better to get to know the speaker a little bit. And then we can get the sense of where the meaning in the poem is coming from and attached to. So I'd be looking for asides to get the personal in there. Even one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is when Lou Watts was talking about the revelation that he had within haiku, where suddenly he was writing haiku that worked, or was when he added the personal in. Even though haiku are these tiny little symbol-filled gestures, like two worlds in one breath smashed together, still, it's so important to have some sense of the personal, the intimate, to make the poem powerful. And that was the last element that he learned. And the same kind of feel here. If we're going to have the I, I think we get to know the I a little bit more, and then we'd feel more of a connection to it, and then more meaning at the end of the poem. So I think that's the key for this one. Let's see. Berries can be full of bones, fine enough to choke on. I have seen the necropolis in Paris. I've chased echoes in the caverns, seen the femurs and finger bones, skulls piled in pyramids like a green grocer's offerings, oranges and lemons gleaming, freshly waxed, silent as the bells that never ring. Gold teeth still shine in old mouths and keep secrets that real bone and tooth will yield to a modern method. Plague mouth, paternity genomes, all questions yield strings of DNA assembled in most certain lines. So I'm waiting sort of for the but, even though it's not necessarily a but itself, but it feels like, I've seen this, and yet, or like, but still. Or, there's something cutting against this list. It's a great list that we've got. But, like, where is the sense of movement coming from? And I think it's what everyone's feeling is they're waiting for that but, And I think, so what could that be? And that's always a question of, like, why did the poem come to be? And there's an impulse to write the poem. And what was that? What was the source of that? That's what we're looking for. And we haven't quite found it yet, I don't think. Large moose skeletons rise from peat bogs. Mammoths emerge from melting ice. And autumn odors rise. Old must from the dust of crushed and sodden oak leaves. We may never find the ancestor of old Saccharomyces a banana. What is that? Let's look that one up. It feels like a bacteria or a fungus or something. That is a cryotolerant type of yeast. It is most likely the parent of larger brewing yeast. Okay. Yeah. We may never find the ancestor of old Saccharomyces whatever, or trace the ice age whispers of the yeast that now bring us beer. Its ascendants growing in great steel vats, cells fat with sugars, cold with a roiling fizz of fermentation, discarded down the drain when the landlord pours a pint of tenants and a pint of amber ale. So great images through, and I think, there is this meaning behind it, which when you get, and I thought I had to reread it again, when you get to the yeast, it's that idea that, crashing so many stuffs together makes for surprising discoveries, I think. And that's kind of what we're talking about. The way that, there's so much life, and it's similar to, the way yeast became beer. And I think that's interesting too. So I'm sorry. I still have a bit of a cold I'm trying to get over. So how do you get to that in a way that feels satisfying, I guess, is the question. And and I think, either cutting out the I, and so, reread that. I think it was a good poem to pull up, if I do say so myself, that Patricia Smith poem, Tavern, Tavern, Church Shuttered Tavern, and see how she does it by it's just a character. Chicago is a character there. And then the character can have that sort of epiphany and sense of movement because it's a character. And so I think it's sort of caught in between two worlds. We have the I, but the I hasn't done anything. So we could pull out the I, and that can be what we cut, or we can have more backstory and more of a sense of who the I is, and then the I as witness of all this can play a part of the story, and then that's where we can get our experience that we're going to take away from the poem. So I think those are the two directions. You get to pick one or the other, and right now it's like in between, and I think that's why it's as rich. There's nothing that really stood out for me to cut. Nothing feels extraneous. It's all great details building the image of the city. So I think that's the only thing to do, is to pick one or the other and try to either strip out the I or add to the I so the I plays an actual part. It is not just sort of a foil for seeing the thing. And I hope that makes sense. But a really excellent poem. Let's see. Yeah, Doug Van Hooser says maybe the poem should just be titled Glasgow. It seems like a great description. Yeah. Paul Buckner says, why are you taking the subway? Where are you going? And there's that. So I take the subway here to do this. And then we can get that sense that we're participating in the narrative that the speaker, by having a subject witnessing something, there's automatically a narrative. There's a story of that person who's seeing it, but we're not let in on that story. So we could take that. Why am I on the subway? Or why did I think of that? What happened that night when I saw this, or that other time when I saw the pigeons? Or you can do flashbacks, or just bring that character to life a little bit. B says, does a poem always need a turn? Can it exist in like a snapshot of a moment? I think it'll always feel unsatisfying if it's just a snapshot of a moment. I mean, a poem is, and this is the analogy I always use, but a poem is a spell. You cast a spell, you create this magical space, and a spell only matters if something happens. Abracadabra, and the bunny turns into a bat. And if it doesn't turn into a bat, if nothing happens, there's no transformation, then it's like a failed spell. It just sort of sits there, and he just said words. There needs to be a point, There needs to be, it's a way to leverage new understanding. It is like a lever. And so, you get the concrete images to get underneath the surface of something that you can pull up. And if you just have that concrete image and it's just that, I mean, it's a nice description. But I think we'll ultimately just be left unsatisfied, wondering why we just read what we read. So I think, yeah, it always does need a turn. And you can look at it, and I've, find a poem that's successful that doesn't have any kind of turn, any kind of sense of movement. And I think it's impossible. You can look at it in the smallest poem, the haiku has that cut, that kirigi, and it becomes one thing to the other thing. And it's that comparison, a metaphor. There's this and this. It has to go from this to this, and that's how it just always works. That's it is the art of doing that. It is the art of turning language into a turn. Brian O'Sullivan says, I think we get the sense that the speaker is science-minded. That might be a start to their character. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's about it. So beautiful poem. Yeah, just that's my suggestions for ways to go. We spent a good amount of time on it, so it's sort of good it was just one poem. What was the other? Did I miss a question? Let me peek back again. What to cut and the stanza breaks. Yeah, so we talked about all that. So good questions, Morgan. Really vivid poem. Yeah. Let's see. Brian McCarty says, this list makes me think of Charles Simich's poem, Seeing Things. It's just a list of things seen, but the turn is toward the implied, and finally there are all these things I saw. Well, let's look at that poem. I was trying to think of a poem that is sort of turnless. So it's always fun to see like what, and maybe that's being sort of science-minded, but like if you strip away everything but one variable, what can you learn, you know? And so how can you find this poem that has, you know, ooh, that's some thunder. How do you find this poem that has, you know, just a list, and yet is there a turn in it? Let's take a peek. This is courtesy of Three Penny Review, as you see there. Seeing Things. It's Charles Simic. I came here in my youth, a wine toy on a string. I saw a street in hell and one in paradise. Saw a room with a light in it so ailing it could have been leaning on a cane. Saw an old man in a tailor's shop kneel before a bride with pins between his lips. Saw the president swear on the Bible while snow fell around him. Saw a pair of lovers kiss in an empty church and a naked man run out of a building waving a gun and sobbing. Saw kids wearing Halloween masks jump from one roof to another at sunset. Saw a van full of stray dogs look back at me. Saw a homeless woman berating God and a blind man with a guitar singing, "Oh Lord, remember me. When these chains are broken, set my body free." Yeah. And so here, you know, I came here in my youth. Yeah. And then we have a whole life play out in here. And I think there is, you know, to me, there's the sense of movement because it's showing the progression of a life. You know, it's this list of things that we've seen. Yeah. And so I think, you know, with that, you know, saw a homeless man berating God and a blind man with a guitar singing, "Oh Lord, remember me. When these chains are broken, set my body free." And the other thing is the contrast between, you know, the homeless woman berating God and the blind man with a guitar singing, you know, about God in praise. And I think that the turn here, the thing that we've moved to by the end of the poem, is the choice of how we're going to live. Like we get this structure, we get this sort of list of things that happen in life. It's like this mini biography in little fragments. And then we, you know, there's sort of this fork in the road and we sort of choose our fork. And I think that's part of what's going on in this poem. Also, as Melody Bonilla points out, seeing things as a contrast to the blind man. Yeah. And so there's that too. So it becomes a really good title. So, yeah. And yet again, too, as I didn't notice this one, Pongrat74 says, there's also the being a toy on a string at the start and wanting chains to be broken at the end. And so we get it's the change of perspective as you move through life. It's, you know, it's the movement of this poem. Yeah, and so Ryan McCarty says, yeah, that's what I was trying to think of with Morgan's poem, how to get to the last image that is one that closes things out. Yeah. Oh, as Dick Westheimer points out, 70 people watching live, only 26 likes so far, so please do click the like button if you haven't yet. And that just helps poetry spread around the internet. People get to be better poets by learning from all of you wonderful folks in the chat window. I mean, you're as good as me at this too. And so it's just like we have this whole group of people that really understands poetry, and we get to help people. And then the poems, it's a sort of selfish, because then the poems we get to read later end up being better poems because we figure out how they work and talk about that. So I think if we just look back one last time. Oh, did I lose it? No, it's here. If we look one last time at this poem, just sort of the overall, from a distance, structure. We have, we have the circles of gum, pressed fat in the pavement. We have the mumps, the measles, and then we ride the subway, the dimpled rind. Let's look at I like this version better. Let's just look at this one. So then I ride the subway. We're emerging above ground. There's the umbrellas like a fungus. So we get all of this sort of life in all its buoyancy percolating up from the ground of the city. and then we get this sort of memories of foxes, what I've seen, and it becomes similar to seeing things actually with I've seen this. You could see the parallels actually between the Charles Simic poem and this one. So I've seen this. Today my lips are stained. And so it should be a big transition. Today my lips are stained, because we have all this memory from the juice, the blackberries, from Peru. And then we get this big run of all that stuff. The gold teeth still shine on old mouths. The plague mouth, we go back to the plague and the history. The strings of DNA, the moose skeletons, all that old stuff. The old must from the dust of crushed and sodden oak leaves. And then maybe the problem, I think maybe we may never find. This is what I was thinking about. So we may never find the ancestor of old Saccharomyces ibiensis. I don't know how to say that. Maybe the problem is that we may never find is not strong enough of a phrase to sort of justify that we've like made a turn with this last one, because the sort of epiphany of discovering that, the serendipity, I guess, of discovering yeast making beer is sort of the point that sort of turn in the poem. But not finding the ancestor kind of underplays that. And maybe it's a sense of that phrase. We need to highlight that last end a little bit more. So maybe that's something to play with too. Okay. Well, anyway, let's move on to another poem, because it's been a bit. It was a full half an hour about one poem, but it was a really good one, Morgan. I'm so glad you sent it, and thanks for sharing that and those great questions too. I think that made for a good opening segment. Now I'm just going to label that so I know that we replied to it today. And go back to the oldest submissions in the queue to see what we've got there. Tim Rogers is the first one up. Tim Rogers from CZ. What is that, Czechoslovakia? I don't know. Submittable no longer shows the actual countries. So I don't know. It just has whatever CZ is. False narratives is the poem question. Why is meaningful coherence asked of poems more often than works in any other art form? How do poems mean? Is meaning in poetry a matter of reason first and emotion second? Well, I think a meaningful coherence is asked of other forms of art, isn't it? I mean, we have, there's some people on the fringes, the Pollocks of the world, the things that are just sort of thrown around. But most things, if you go through an art gallery, there's a purpose to most things, and you can sort of identify it pretty easily. I mean, and so I'm not sure if that's actually true. But then how do poems mean? Is meaning in poetry a matter of reason first and emotion second? I think, to me, meaning in a poem is experiential. I don't think it's sort of reason first or second, or emotion first or second. I think, poetry is stepping into the voice of somebody else, letting their breath inhabit your body, and then having that experience, that direct connection where sort of you're saying what they're saying, and then you can experience it. And then you experience the sort of complexity of if it's done right, the complexity of all the emotions and the feelings that are happening at once. Like, everything is so complex, we don't capture it at all. And so I think that's where the meaning comes from. It's sort of an experiential meaning. We're transferring experience through the magic of storytelling in this oral way, where we focus on the images and let ours sort of drift away in the mind's eye. And I think that, yeah. Holly York says a poem should not mean, but be. Yeah. Well, I don't know if I agree with that, because I think being is the meaning. You end up learning from the experience of learning someone else's experience. And that's the meaning. Let's see. Question from Rosenard. Some poets stay quiet while their poems are critiqued. Would it be more constructive if they contributed to the discussion, or is it better to critique without them explaining anything? I think it's sort of... It depends on the poem and what's going on. So if we're all completely confused about the poem and talking about something that makes no sense, and you want to chime in, then great, because then we won't waste our time on something, as long as you take the point that we didn't get what you meant. So I think it depends. And I think if when I do poetry workshops, which isn't all that often, like around a table, I say it's good to be quiet at first and like listen before you chime in as the writer, but then we can add stuff too. What we intended matters. I think you can add that too. Okay, well, let's take a look at this. This is, again, Tim Rogers from the Czech Republic. And here we go. And I think I should wait. Hang on. Bear with me 1 second. I made this like whole window too big. I'm going to shrink it down. So I have to keep. Okay. That's better. The Gentle Islander's Blind Side. Do we have 2 poems? Yeah, 2 poems here. Pretty good length. The Gentle Islander's Blind Side. Okay. A tsunami of calamity shipwrecked behind his hairline. His cherished anonymity washes out to sea. Thinking of the susurrus of tombstones erodes the peaceful grace of his days, passing incrementally without notice. The sun's shadows eternally return to the norm of noon alone. A bouquet of tender silences decorated with tear stains the tides leave behind, new commingling with old in the fading firelight of dawn, lost perceptions promised, resurrection of the ancient place, Atlantis misplaced. The paper maps a shackle that won't unlock, the indelible record of telltale hours juxtaposed against the time for high seas shoehorned in. It is its own answer. Ritualized as prizes are, ribbons and medals and chalices of gold, the deafening bells tolling in the marketplace, the insistence of the merchant's jingle lost the way nostalgic memories never are, the way a ticket stub is stuffed in a pocket, reduced to a lump in the wash. Disturbing revelations follow lost chances, the lottery of voluminous no man's land abandoned, where the town's central square makes a display of the theater's unlit fiction, estimated days only guessed at. Before understanding the science of aerodynamics, disentangling the prosaic annotations sketched by the intention of wings roughly. A wave is broken, casually strewn the way litter is, a rhythm repeated, reinforced in dull legitimacy, depleted of its false convictions, a world formed before waking. The metamorphosis of naked, the delighted in evidence, what the clockwork of the moon proves, compersive, water moves contrapposto. Another sign, sadness, is an inversion caused by love, a momentary sliding from the eye, the wan smile connecting, where neither sees either, intuiting clues. Syllables exaggerated enough to warble what we cannot see, agonies birthed in metaphor, Cheshire grin selflessly fading, imperceptible faith without sin, telegraphing reasons the breath denies. The presence of palpable blackness, the raven and its camouflage of splendor, the least mechanical of havens imaginable, what was once distant and far magnified by proximity, nature offers its note of absolution in a forest of similars. This is the that of dits and das, plain spoken, every leaf on every branch of every tree florid with greatest of differences. The sky is a migratory notion, an illustration of the nature of change, printed boldly on a bamboo shirt, on a cultivated cotton, swirling where a climax shifts the currents, a taste for the vacancy left lingering in the mind, the sensible whole in the orthography of completeness, effortlessly vernal, or the end of the race, circumflexes empathy, substituted for ice cream, cake, or spaghetti. Yeah, the first comment I looked at was sorry, I'm lost. And Lisa Sloan says I'm lost too. And so again, this is a great, so I think the question, the original question from the poet was, why is meaningful coherence asked of poems more often than works of any other art form? And how do poems mean? Is it a matter of reasoning and emotion? And I think this is just a perfect example of why coherence is asked for in poems. Like, there are great lines here, but there's nothing to connect them to. We're sort of desperately like, where does this go with this? How do these threads fit together? And I think if you're, some poems, and some poets end up having really complicated poems that are sort of like puzzles that are really hard to unlock. John Ashbery is the famous one. But you're willing to sit with a John Ashbery poem if you like John Ashbery poems and it's John Ashbery because there's something underneath the surface. But a stranger's poem that you're getting that you don't know, if you're seeing it in a literary magazine or on Critique of the Week or on a social media post or anywhere, or even in a literary magazine, if you don't know that you like the taste of that literary magazine, are you going to trust that there's something underneath this to read it over and over and over again? First of all, you're not. And so, it's really hard to connect with a poem like this. Maybe there's something, if we, worked at it and read it and pieced it together, maybe there's something there. But I don't have the motivation. Life's too short to sort of interrogate every poem like this, especially when there's so many poems in the world that don't have anything beneath them. There's no reason to have faith in that. That if you dug in and read, you would find something there. And so it's really low. The admission price is high and the odds of reward are low. And so who's going to spend the time with it? I think that's the fundamental problem with a poem like this. Yeah. So, but there's some great lines too. And I think to me, that's a shame that there's great lines with nothing to connect them to. Paul Buckner says, the first line is really great. A tsunami of calamity shipwrecked behind his hairline. Yeah, so I like that. I like the cherished anonymity washes out to sea. Thinking of the susurrus of tombstones arose the peaceful grace of his days. If we got into understanding who the he was, who the gentle islander is, then we could appreciate it. But it just sort of goes on and on and on with description that we're not let into. And by the time we're into the deafening bells tolling in the marketplace, the insistence of the merchant's jingle, lost the way, nostalgic memories never are. Like, whose nostalgic memories? What's lost? Like, I just, I'm lost is what I am. Michael Antrobus says, I think the answer to the question of why is cohesion demanded of poems has to do with what the poet is trying to achieve in writing the poem. If the goal is to be read by others and have them share, then you need to bring others along. Yeah, exactly. Dick Westermer says, writing is different than imagistic art. The subject of images exists without humans, but words require that of a human write them, so we need to have some evidence of the human breaking the silence. That's interesting. I actually don't agree. I think images, because we see, the world that we see is a map of meaning, and everything we're looking at is a mental object that we're categorizing and figuring out how to use. And that's how we actually perceive the world as humans. And otherwise, it's sort of waves of different electromagnetic energy, bouncing into our eyeballs is all until we decipher it. And the deciphering is part of everything. And so I think in a weird way, that's the case with image artwork. It's playing with the models of what we expect, and it's still doing that even outside of language. So I don't think it's unique to poetry, I'd say. Yeah. Mary Ellen Carr says, but John Ashbery was once a stranger too. How did he earn the reputation that encouraged readers to plug on? Sorry, not familiar with him, so I don't know. He worked his way up, the academic hierarchy by teaching, and I think his earlier work was more scrutable too, so he sort of earned people's trust along the way. But so I think we're just lost in the poem, and there's a lot of stuff to appreciate if we could find our way. But I haven't seen anybody leave a comment saying that they understand or even guessing what the poem is really about. Fun language, but this is like trying to decode an action painting. And Maney likes the title a lot. So there's that. Let's take a look. Let's read. I don't want to read the whole poem again because I was getting too lost in the middle. Let's read the last two stanzas, though. This This thee that of dits and da's, plain spoken, every leaf on every branch of every tree, florid with the greatest of differences. The sky is a migratory notation, an illustration of the nature of change, printed bodily on a bamboo shirt or on cultivated cotton. Like, so every step of the way, I'm thinking, like, whose bamboo shirt? Where is the bamboo shirt? These images, this is one of those ones where the images float in a kind of limbo because you don't know where to connect them. And so they kind of just, the images here, that's nice. The images there, that's nice. But then what do they weave into? Swirling where a climax shifts the currents, a taste for the vacancy left lingering in the mind, the sensible whole in the orthography of completeness. I mean, that's a cool phrase. Effortlessly vernal, or the end of the race. Like what race? I mean, like race has so many ways to interpret that. I'm not sure, I don't know how to, and just that's just one example. But like, is it the race of life in general, the human race? Which sort of layer of magnification are we on? That's really important to understanding just that line. And we're not there. Circumflexes of empathy, substituted for ice cream cake or spaghetti. Anyway, let's take a look at the other poem. We'll see. Well, it's kind of long too. Okay, well, we'll see. If it just feels the same way, I'm going to bow out. That's what we're going to do with this one. But if it's got some more to go on, situate ourselves. So propaganda is the title here. And a one-word title about a topic, sort of, we assume that's what the poem's going to be about. And so maybe that's enough of an anchor that we can establish ourselves. I think one of the problems is if you have, two things I wanted to say too. If you have a poem that's the sort of collage of things that you're not quite sure how they piece together, there's a lot more, we cut you a lot more slack as readers if it's a shorter poem. And so having it be, cutting it in size allows us to play with it a lot more and gives you a lot more grace, period. Also, the title being more direct, letting us know what it's about, would really help. The Gentle Islander's Blind Side. If there was a poem that told some kind of situation, that would mean something, but I don't know how to apply that to everything else. So, yeah. Okay, well, anyway, let's take a look at this other poem, Propaganda. Easy listening music leaking from the speaker of a stereo, turned down low, seduces the unconscious to toe tap away the frayed edges. Torn divisions, the stale sermons the day has deemed necessary, a familiar beat, a welcome diversion, nature unsullied by introspection, hiding, scared of the pressures that play through the rhythm section, not what's in the central melody itself, the cultural hook, the incalculable look of fashion, two-step shuffle or hip-hop fluidity. Remember that familiarity, infectious earworm, not what replays in the background, hardly noticed. Beginning again and then once more again, indistinguishable. Fearless details rubbed into the skin, a soothing balm or sweet nothing whispered devastatingly. Broken from the cone, the flecks of the plane and the sill of the window. The glazier's oily putty angled with a knife, dutiful against ravages, savages, storms. Forecast because we believe what comes next, the anger of the seasons. Winter ice, a lens that melds the fluctuations of scream. The dream time monster. Sorry, where'd my mouse go? There it is. Sorry. The dream time monster roller coaster of coursing blood, an uneasy confirmation, childhood bones growing into pains, algorithms that open a door or a gate in the garden fence. Yeah. Let's see. I'm just looking at some of the comments as we go. Perhaps more concrete imagery. Yeah. Yeah. Paul Buckner says needs to be condensed. DeQuest says, when I see work like this, I wonder what the poet is keeping from us or themselves. Yeah. And so with this poem, and how much longer does it go? Yeah, it's a whole page and a half more. It's the same kind of thing. But you can see, I think you can feel, I think this is a really important thing to note, that when we had the title as Propaganda, it was easier to like sort of dip longer into the poem. Even when I got to the Dreamtime monster roller coaster of the coursing blood, I know this is all metaphors springing up for propaganda. And so I was able to stay with it for a while. But then, imagine sealed orders relaying arriving officious with meaningless insignias, a military salad bar, a commander's regalia. It just goes on and on. Whereas Mark Grenier says, AI here. It's sort of just, it's riffing like so long that I lost it. Yeah. Melody Boone says, I followed it for a while, but it's almost as though the poet lost the theme himself. Yeah, I mean, it's great to riff on things, but then you have to rein in your riffs. You have to find ways back to that touchstone. And I think, propaganda is a really good touchstone for a poem. We know what you're talking about, but every once in a while you have to point us back there and keep that connection to what we're talking about so that we can stray as far as the mind can leap. Otherwise, you're just sort of riffing off in really what amounts to be. It's fluid, but it's sort of a mechanical way. And the poem could just keep going on as long as you want till you feel like ending, And so I think it's so much about keeping that touchstone alive, pointing back to the propaganda and letting us know what it's about as long as you can go. And so that's what, yeah. Winston Munn says, feels like the poet is following his imagination, which is good, but never bothers to revise. Yeah. And I think, it's fine if you want to write this for yourself, but if you're going to have other people enjoy it and appreciate it, you have to let us in more. You have to keep an eye on those touchstones that we're holding on to keep us grounded in understanding what's going on and what we're actually writing about, or else we won't really care. I have... Myself, I've written some poems. I have this whole train style of poems from American Fractal, especially. The body is one of them. The American Fractal, the title poem from that's another. You can Google them and look those up. But they're the same kind of running with your subconscious. But you always have to nod back to what you're doing for us to keep wanting to read. Lisa Seidenberg says, and this is a really good point, I think there's a different sensibility and style between Eastern European and Western writing. And I think that's really true too. But I think what you see in the successful poets, and there are a whole bunch of great poets from Eastern Europe, is that they find ways to hold just enough of a thread that we don't feel completely lost. And then you want to explore like the maze that's laid out before you if you have like that thread. Just imagine that as a metaphor. Like we're going into a poem is exploring a maze. And as long as we have a hold of like the escape rope so we can find our way out, that thread, then we're happy to explore. But as soon as we lose that thread, we just want to get the hell out of there. And that's what we do with poems when we have nothing to connect them to. And so, so as Mark Grenier says, there's considerable talent here, but it needs to more control and focus, I think. Yeah, just finding a way to rein that in a little and keep that guide going. Yeah. Elizabeth Brown says, maybe I love so many of the Polish poets and you can follow them. Yeah, the Polish poets and Borska, the Swedish poets. I mean, there's wonderful poets all over the place. We published a few times Tomasz Solomon. He's a wonderful poet. I don't know how long it's been since I pulled this poem up. I think you can see, let's see. Let me pull this because it's a short one. So I always like to go to it as an example of what you can do, how much you can stray. See, this one isn't even titled. It's Tomasz Solomon. Anyone who falls into an Arabic night should know that laws there are ruthless and brutal at first. One hears tingle-tangle from the high stone walls. Someone drops a rope with a basket. Leave the dates alone. Don't eat them. That's how they stop drovers. If the rope is strong enough, allow yourself to be pulled up. For 3 days I was smiling and bowing and was just about to eat the rugs when God caught me naked. And so, that's Slovenian poet, translated by Sonia Kravanya, Tomasz Solomon. And the thing is, with the shortness of that and there's sort of a profound mystery in the lines that you want to explore because you're close enough to meaning. And the poem is short enough where when you say, was just about to eat the rugs when God caught me naked. That's a satisfying ending because it makes you want to reread the poem instead of feel like the poem left without you. You don't feel so lost. And the shortness of that is a really great thing too. Yeah. Anyway, okay, let's move on. Let's do one more poet because I hate when we only do two because we got to catch up on this stuff. So let's do one more poet before we shuffle off. And okay, so the next poet up is Briana Gilliam from Merida, Spain. Okay. So there's a questions for a childhood friend moves abroad. I'm new to writing, and after watching a few critiques of the week, I've been trying to work on the storytelling aspect of poetry. I'm not sure if people reading this poem will understand the story I'm trying to create. Thank you for the awesome sessions. Okay, well, you're welcome. Thanks for participating, and looking forward to checking these out. You got two poems for us, and they're both relatively short, sort of a little more than sonnet length. The first one is, and you can't see the title, it's up at the very top, A Child Friend Moves Abroad. I would recommend putting the title in, or it's The Long Midnight. That's the name of the file, so it's hard to tell. I'd recommend putting the title in with the poem just so we know what we're looking at more easily, just when you submit and things like that too. Okay. Nancy Tanel says, by the way, I always recognize my bad poem just after I hit the submit button. Sigh. And that's a really fascinating thing that happens too. When you read poems, there used to be a lot more open mics and places to read poems. It feels like, post-COVID and in the 21st century, that's died out a good amount. But the great thing about reading poems at open mics is you get that same feeling before you even submit. And what it really is you're fooling yourself. What's that line? We're all experts at fooling ourselves. We really are. But then once you sort of are forced to see yourself as other people are seeing you, then suddenly the thing that you're trying not to notice, that you're trying to withhold from yourself. Because, I'm many layers, I am multitudes or whatever. There's so many layers of our own consciousness. And one of them is trying to lie to us about how good the poem is. And then when we put it out for public display, it sort of lie loses strength. And then we see it for what it really is. And that's just a human nature thing. And so it's great to read at open mics, great to read on the prompt lines, great to participate in Critique of the Week or have some kind of circle you can share because then you can't fool yourself as easily. So really a good note just as an aside. Okay. Here we go. And then this poem is, I think, because that's what she called it in the note. A childhood friend moves abroad. Today I woke up before the rooster's call. Nails screeching across a chalkboard would have been a better alarm. But empty bellies don't make for meat cutes. I spied Benedict Arnold giving out his commands. Milk or death, he bellowed, because being toothless and wordless never stopped him before. Who was I but a slave to his charms? 400 years of war, the analog points out. I'm dreary, weary, dopey, and regretting my name, while he's high on practicing his M's and A's, a new weapon he'll bear at mid-morning snack. I put up a fight like yesterday and the days before, but some drools and giggles make for great AK-47s, readying to throw fists after a toe too many to mouth. I instead quiver when the dimple of domination comes out. I cock-a-doodle-doo later, and he's given up the fight. His Highness has deemed me worthy to carry him back to his palace, where a throne of cotton lay perched. I crash face first into my cocoon and dream of milk. Yeah. So Elizabeth Brown says, nice variation in diction in this poem. And I think this is a good counterpoint to the last poet, actually, because I'm not really following it, but there's enough there that I'm enjoying it and sort of willing to read it again. Part of it is the length. But part of it is the way that it uses, even though it's talking about something we're not quite accessing, and there's some kind of surreal things going on, it's still enough of a traditional way of talking about them. As James Spencer says, no story evident, but I like that second stanza. the sort of scaffolding of storytelling is there. And that's one of the tricks, by the way. We mentioned John Ashbery before. That's one of the things that he does is speak in a way that would make sense for a regular storytelling and then flip absurd and surreal and leaps into it that don't actually make sense and connect. And so I think, I think this is a good example of at least how being opaque, you can still make the poem interesting. As Hemet Malik says, baby needing a feed. I'd like to read the poem again because I didn't quite get it. But with all the details, I might get it on a second read. Yeah, Paul Buckner says, lots of language to chew on. It sounds good read aloud. And Melody Bonilla says, can't understand it, but I like the sound of the speaker. And it was that variation of lines and the pacing that was really nice. Yeah, Lisa Sloan says the same thing too. This one makes you want to actually sit with it and figure out, or at least imagine what's going on. Yeah, and so the title kind of, even though it's tough to see, it's way up there. The child friend moves abroad. That almost like throws us off because I'm not sure what the moving abroad is, but that might be a key to understanding the poem. Danette Burmia says, I see the baby battle brewing. And yeah, that's what I'm thinking about too. And Hemet brought that up as well. Okay, so let's reread this again. A child friend moves abroad. Today I woke up before the rooster's call. Nails screeching across a chalkboard would have been a better alarm. But empty bellies don't make for meat cutes. Yeah, I don't know what a meat cute is. I assume that's some cultural reference from that I don't know. Let's Google that really quick just because I'm curious. Meet cute is a scene often in romantic comedies where two characters first meet under unusual, humorous, or cute circumstances, leading to a potential romantic relationship. Okay. Well, that's neat. I learned something today. Thank you for that. But empty bellies don't make for meet cutes. So to me, the poem very clearly is as a baby waking you up early needing to be fed. I spied Benedict Arnold giving out his commands, milk or death. And so this is where we get a bit of a leap, but then we know it's still talking about the baby. Milk or death, he bellowed, because being toothless and wordless never stopped him before. Who was I but a slave to his charms? 400 years of war, the analog points out. That's one I don't understand. 400 years. Since 1620 something? I'm not sure. I'm dreary, weary, dopey. I'm not sure what the analog. 400 years of war. The analog clock? Is there like a wall clock? I don't know. That's one line I'm a little confused by. I'm dreary, weary, dopey, and regretting my name. I think that's a great description of being that tired, first-time parent. While he's sorry, high on practicing his M's and A's, a new weapon he'll bear at mid-morning snack. I think that's great. I like the description. I like him being Benedict Arnold, too. That's fun. I put up a fight like yesterday and the days before, but some drools and giggles make for great AK-47s, readying to throw fists after a toe too many to the mouth. I instead quiver when the dimple of domination comes out. So, the cuteness of the dimple. I cuck-a-doodle-doo later, and he's given up the fight. His Highness has deemed me worthy to carry him back to his palace where a throne of cotton lay perched. I crash face first into my macoon and dream of milk. So I think it's a really wonderful story. I don't understand. I enjoyed the poem, too, on a second read. I think it was just a childhood friend moves abroad that was throwing me off, and I still don't know how to connect that to the poem. So the first read, I was trying to imagine how this was a childhood friend moves abroad, how that, where that would come up, and it never did. But the poem, I don't know, it was like a false lead or something, or maybe some kind of leap that we can't make. I don't know. I mean, what do you all think about that? It's sort of, the poem otherwise is just a really great description of that feeling of, having to wake up to feed the baby. And a really playful, fun poem. I enjoyed it. Let's see. Yeah. Oh, okay. So, is Briana? She said "Along Midnight" is the title. Okay, so yeah, so that's the thing. If you have when you don't put the title with the poem, we can't tell what the title is really. So you can see if I scroll over here, the PDF is called the long midnight.pdf. And so I guess that is the title. Okay, so that makes a little more sense, and that doesn't throw me off then. A Long Midnight. Is the Long Midnight, is that a reference to something? Because, I don't know, it feels like maybe it's a reference I don't understand. If it is, maybe it's cool. If not, I think a better title that's a little more vivid and does something more would be good. Yeah. And as Morgan Feny said too, I'm glad you pointed this out because I was going to and forgot. Nails on a chalkboard felt a bit cliche if I'm nitpicking. Yeah. Today I woke up before the rooster's call. Nails screeching across a chalkboard would have been a better alarm. If we could describe that a little different, that might be better because that is a cliche. Yeah. Aaron Fowler says a reference to Parenthood. I think she means a title. I think that would be a better title if we had, instead of the Long Midnight. Okay. Oh, so B here is the poet. Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah. So a title with just a little more, I think a title that's as playful as the poem would be a good title here. Like something. This is one of those cases where it's fun if there was like in the draft of it some other line that didn't quite work, but you wanted to use. Like for example, what is that poem? Kristen. Is this the one I'm thinking of? Let me see. No, sorry. I was thinking of At the Office Holiday Party by Kristen O'Keefe, which is a great poem from Rattle, but that's not the kind of title I'm thinking of. If there was a title that was like A New Weapon He'll Bear at Mid-Morning Snack or something like that, where something that's sort of playful, not included in the poem, some other detail that you sort of forgot to include, that you could have but didn't end up, something on the cutting room floor. I don't know if you know, in movies, the sort of the extra stuff, the film that's not in the movie itself, the different takes and things are end up being used to make the trailers. And sometimes you can do that for a poem too. Like this line didn't work in the poem, but let's make it the title. And I think this is a poem that's sort of asking for a title like that because there are a lot of really interesting, fun lines. I think you can do something. So maybe, or think of it like you would writing a haibun where there's a new haiku or a new title coming up that sort of cuts against it and does something surprising. But like, what else could you add about this that's not in the poem yet? I think that could make a good title. So that's what I would suggest for that. Let's see. Now, The Dimple of Domination would be a good title. It would, but I don't want to take anything out of the poem. So let's try to find something new. Like sort of stretch your imagination, leap one more time into this sort of metaphoric world you built and add some new detail that you sort of, maybe it was like the wrong time of day so you didn't get it in, like in the middle of the night, the baby does this or something like that, where something surprising, kind of fun in the same way. I think that would work really well. Okay. Let's see. Morgan Feny says I think maybe why I felt lost was because the verb tenses seem to be wandering between past and present. Maybe just because the poet is tired. I don't know. That's interesting. I didn't really see that. Katie Scruggs Galloway says burp rag, white flag. Yeah, that's a cool title. Yeah, something like that. Something along those lines. C. Farrell says sometimes cliches just work. And I think they work when you extend them a little farther or use them in a slightly different way. I think it's close to working when, nails screeching across a chalkboard would have been a better alarm. So, because a cliche is a chunk of thought. So, yeah, let's see. About the tenses, today I woke up, let's see, stanza 2 moves to the present tense. Today I woke up before the rooster's call, nails screeching on chalkboard, but empty bellies don't make for meat cutes. I spied Benedict Arnold, so we're in the past tense here. He bellowed, who was I? 400 years of war, the analog points out. I'm dreary, weary, dopey. Yeah, we do have this shift. I think it'd be better in the present tense all the way through. I wake up before the rooster's call. Yeah, I didn't notice that shift, but it definitely is there. Sorry, I keep hitting a mute. All right, let's take a look at the other poem. And So this is the one. A childhood friend moves abroad. So that clears that up a little bit. Yeah. Here we go. A childhood friend moves abroad. Our worlds pass by with a gentle brush of the hand, for time is a construct man-made that breaks all apart. Yet we exist at the crossroads of every breath, tear and laugh, the song of now. Yesterday and tomorrow, a peaceful discord, a mirror captures still life painted on the camera lens, while the moon gazes into the eyes of the Mediterranean sun, when year dresses as day and day disguises himself as year. Our worlds pass by with a gentle brush of the hand. Candles burn louder as earth completes her pirouette. The first snowfall melts before ever touching the ground. The world is a vast abyss of moments celebrated and forgot, for time is a construct, man-made that breaks all apart. Two souls bound in a blanket of friendship and love, tethered together by the threads on our unyielding persons. We are no more than a united catastrophe of emotions, yet we exist at the crossroads of every breath. Tear and laugh, we embrace time stolen and given. From the first milk whites to the silver strands that envelop the essence of what could be. Acknowledging perhaps in death we'll be home once more, the song of now, yesterday, and tomorrow in peaceful discord. As Elizabeth Brown says, the title grounds this poem. Yeah. I think this one, to me, I lost my sort of train of thought a little bit more. I found it a little less interesting than the last poem. There are a few things that are notable too. And then we have this fully repeated line. Our worlds pass by with a gentle brush of the hand, and it repeats there. But, and then this line becomes here. I'm trying to figure out what the form is. Laugh. So, and then the third line becomes the last line of this. And then the fourth line becomes the last line of that. Yeah. What's this form? So, the poet is here. I'm not sure. I've never seen this before. Yeah. Lisa Sloan says not a lot happening except good writing and nice sentiment. Morgan Feny says, I like milk whites to silver strands, but in some places I feel the poetic rhythm really falters. And Jamie Thomas, there's some golden nuggets in here, though. Yeah. And abstract words take me out of the poem, said Mary Picot. And I agree with all those comments. But it's an interesting form. Our worlds pass by with a gentle brush of the hand, for time is constructed as a construct man-made that breaks all apart. So it's the abstraction, our worlds pass by with a gentle brush of the hand. If we go to then describing the hand and how that feels, we can deeper into the poem and in the concrete nature of what's going on. So we get to feel it a little bit more. Instead, we move to the abstract. For time is a construct made that breaks all apart. Yet we exist at a crossroads of every breath, tear, and laugh. The song of now, yesterday, and tomorrow in peaceful discord. I think that's really what's holding the poem back is the abstraction in those three lines. And then we're writing toward that for this form, which thanks for sharing. It's called a cascade, says the poet. And the poet B is Briana. Thanks, Briana, for sharing that. I've never seen that form before, so that's neat. So I think if we can get through the first lines without abstraction, I think the poem would work a lot better. Is Sarah Rashid Khan says, abstract words work when anchored by concrete images. Yeah, and that's the problem. We lose the anchor, and so they end up being just abstract, which, they make us think, but they don't have that work on that tangible, physical, bodily level. And so, our words pass by with a gentle brush of the hand is a great example. Our words passing by is an abstraction, but then because we compare that to a gentle brush of the hand, we can feel that abstraction. And we feel the poem a lot more deeply in that line. And there aren't the same kind of elements connecting it to real concrete experience in the other lines. And that's why the poem sort of feels kind of flat to me. And Morgan Feny says, too, is a construct man-made that breaks all apart. is just not the way we'd speak in modern normal English. And yeah, and that's another aspect of it too. We're using the music of speech, and we want to write like somebody would say it, even if it's super high register, who got a whatever perfect score on the verbal SAT or whatever, and speaks in that really lofty language. They would say it that way, Or if you talk about like a Bukowski poem, and it's really gruff and talking about like the garbage man, he would say it that way. And there are different registers, and we want to be in someone's register. And feel authentic. And I think some of the abstract lines don't. Rose Leonard points out the previous poem was deliciously concrete and specific, and yeah, that was the strength of the last one, and so that's what's missing here. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, let's keep going, though. A mirror captures a still life painted on the camera lens, while the moon gazes into the eyes of the Mediterranean sun. When year dresses as day and day disguises himself as year, our worlds pass by with a gentle brush of the hand. Yeah, and so we have images there, but because we sort of got into the abstract mode, we're sort of still, we're feeling the abstraction of them rather than them as concrete. Paul Buckner says needs action. Yeah. Candles burn louder as earth contemplates her pirouette. Yeah, so how do candles burn louder, first of all? And like, who's witnessing, interacting with the candles? Like, we've lost a sense of that hand, which was the most concrete thing going in the poem. The first snowfall melts before ever touching. I don't understand the in parentheses. I think the ground is fine, and I would keep it. So I'm not sure. The world is a vast abyss of movements. So that vast abyss is, again, we're very, very abstract. Moments celebrated and forgot, for time is a construct made that breaks all apart. Two souls bound in a blanket of friendship. He's just so abstract. Tethered together by the threads of our unyielding persons. And again, unyielding persons is that same as that second line that doesn't feel natural. We are no more than a united catastrophe of emotions. I like that phrase. Yet we exist at the crossroads of every breath, tear, and laugh. We embrace time stolen and forgiven. From the first milk whites to the silver strands that envelop the essence of what could be. So the milk whites to the silver strands is nice, but I don't know what the essence of what. I'm not sure. I'm lost. Acknowledging perhaps in death will be home once more, the song of now, yesterday, and tomorrow in peaceful discord. Yeah. Okay. So with the poem as a childhood friend moves abroad, but we've never sort of seen the two friends. We have all these things mentioning the two souls bound in a blanket, but we don't actually see them bound in a blanket. We don't see them interacting with anything. I think that's the key to make this poem come to life, is to bring the two people to life, and just have some kind of concrete way to discuss that, And I think our worlds pass by with a gentle brush of the hand. And then maybe dive into that. I think that's a good first line. Maybe dive into the symbol and metaphor of that and extend it and see where that goes. But I think what we have is sort of a summary of what the poem wants to say. Another thing that comes to mind is the way that this poem, if you gave it to the friend, they would probably really appreciate it. And so it strikes me as a private kind of poem where it's written, for the friend instead of for a general audience who doesn't know the relationship. And so, and like I always stress, there's nothing wrong with that. Like if you're writing a poem for your friend and you give it to your friend, that's great. They don't need sort of timeless ways to anchor the emotion into, the history of art or something. And so, anyway, so maybe the poem just did what it had to do. But in doing that, it summarized, what it wanted to say and didn't provide a sort of anchor for it to say that we can connect with and remember. So if you want to make that poem, if you want to make the private poem, my suggestion would be to start with that first line and extend that metaphor. Our worlds pass by with a gentle brush of the hand, like the way our hands brushed when we were here and did this, and then this happened. And can you feel it on the tips of your fingers, the way our, blah, blah, blah. And, you can run with that. stick with that metaphor. And I think the poem could emerge from that. I think that's the easiest sort of door to enter in the poem as I see it. So that would be my advice. But I think, interesting form though. I like that cascade where you take each line becomes, in the first stanza, becomes the last line of every subsequent stanza. That's a pretty interesting form, sort of similar to a Sestino-like or Villanelle-like or something. And, it's interesting. All right. I think that's going to wrap it up. Thanks, everybody, for sharing. It's been a good 90 minutes of critiquing. Now, the Poetry Space did come out today. We haven't even mentioned that yet because it was so busy with other stuff. The Poetry Space is Katie Dozier's podcast. I'm the co-host. That dropped on iTunes, Spotify, whatnot. We're talking about Imagists, the Imagist poets, so HD, Pound, all those folks, and then how that relates to poetry now. And then next week's episode is going to be just on imagery itself. And so we're taking that sort of springboard. So check out the Poetry Space. You find that on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere else you get your podcast. And also, we did have that Ask Me Anything over on Reddit if you want to check out if you're looking for something to read. So check that out. And now the guest in the Rattlecast coming up this week is going to be Rich Humans. Sorry, I've been saying it wrong. Rich Humans. And Rich is the editor of Contemporary Hyben Online, one of the great places for Hyben. He was in the Hyben issue of Rattle, so it's another Hyben-centric episode. He's also got a couple books and some great Hyben he shared with us. So check all that out. And definitely, Contemporary Hyben Online is a really great website to find all the ways you can explore more deeply in your poems through that form. So Rich Humans is the guest. The prompt for this week was the following. If you bear with me, the prompt was to find a song lyric from a genre you don't normally listen to and use that as an epigraph to a poem. So find a song lyric, a key, a genre that you don't normally listen to, and then use that as the epigraph to inspire a poem. As your prompt for this week, Rich Humans is the guest. Rattlecast 297. The regular time, Sunday, June 15th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and we'll talk to you later. Good night.